Firstly, just wanting to welcome everyone to the forum today. Really blown away by the response that we've had. We've had over 160 people RSVP for the event today, which is quite extraordinary. And we were just talking before we let you in that we're not quite sure how we would have managed it if we were actually having to do this face-to-face. So really happy that everyone's interested in the discussion today. Just some initial logistics, which you can see on the screen now. Hopefully you can see that slide. As I said, if everyone can just keep themselves muted through the presentation, it just makes it easier when you have so many people in the Zoom room. We will be sending out the slides after the event as well. And just to note that we are recording this, which if you've got other family members in your house and you're worried that they might be running into the background, is also another reason that you might want to turn your camera off through the presentation. But if you turn your camera off, it also means it actually helps a little bit when you have so many people in a Zoom meeting to make sure that the images aren't freezing and so forth. Now, also just to say that we do want to hear from you through the meeting as well. So if you do have any comments or questions, please use the chat function. And where we can, we will draw that into the conversation that we're having. We will, at the end of the meeting, if there are questions that have gone unanswered, we will endeavour to get back to you with responses about that. And also just to acknowledge that we have received a couple of comments and questions that we will also touch on through the presentation. So with the logistics kind of part of it out of the way, I would like to formally welcome everyone into this forum. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I live and work, the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging leaders. And I'd also like to just pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where you are all located today, and recognising that we're not necessarily all sitting in the same room today. So thank you all for coming. For those who don't know me, my name's Kerry Farrance. I am the Head of Impact at the Give Where You Live Foundation. We're really excited to be working with the panel members here today to present this event. I will do a very quick introduction for everyone who's presenting. We have Pat from Philanthropy Australia. Pat is going to help facilitate the panel discussion, but is also going to give us a little bit of an introduction into what we're seeing across the sector as a whole in this current context. We have Austin and Gill from the Percy Baxter Charitable Trust here with us today. We have Gail from the Geelong Community Foundation and Cynthia from the Anthonyy Costa Foundation as well. As I said, we received a couple of comments and questions prior to today's event. So thank you for those who sent those through in advance. I'm not going to read them in detail, but I will just sort of make a quick comment that some of the questions or comments that were being made were around funding and supporting education at this critical point in time, with a really strong sort of argument of that in order for our region to build its economic and social prosperity, it is imperative that we help Geelong's children to thrive at school and beyond. So really acknowledging that actually support into the education system is also really critical at this point. There were some comments and questions around the challenging fundraising environment at the moment, and also an acknowledgement of some foundations who have been able to provide emergency grants, and a question around whether that is a consideration ongoing as well, recognising that we are still probably quite early in this current context and we have a long way to go. That's the brief introduction. I'm then going to just hand over to Pat now, who will give us a bit of a context around what we're seeing in philanthropy at this point in time.
Thanks, Kerry. I'm going to try to go to the next slide. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you today and to discuss the challenges facing your region during this most unprecedented year. And importantly, let's stay on that first slide for a minute, to hear from your local foundations who are working hard to help. I'll take a few minutes, probably over about the next 10 minutes, to summarize what we've been up to at Philanthropy Australia and to give you some data about how funders are behaving during the COVID-19 crisis. We'll then look at how it's playing out in your region and hear from our panelists for the majority of the session. Philanthropy Australia has been working closely with our members, government, and key sector leaders to support charities and not-for-profits to help them continue to provide essential services and employment for over 1.2 million Australians. We've compiled information, resources, and ideas to support funders and NFPs through the COVID-19 and recovery period. Much of it's available on our public website. So one is our free national funding platform with the Australian Communities Foundation that allows charities to register funding needs and for funders to offer targeted support. Our members are regularly meeting via virtual sessions like this one to discuss the way forward, the best way forward. And we just had a COVID-19 catch up just an hour ago where we heard a couple of presentations about the state of the sector and the challenges facing NFPs. So that information will be made available more broadly, but there's just a lot going on. We've released a series of COVID-19 government policy recommendations that we are urging political leaders to adopt to provide extra relief for the charitable sector, and we'll continue to report back to the sector as news comes to hand. A few months ago, we extensively surveyed our funders to gather details about their giving patterns during COVID-19. We've just surveyed them again for further analysis, and you'll see those results reported in our Philanthropy Weekly News soon. These are some of the indicative results from the first survey. So I'm going to try to get up. There we go. So the first question, have you changed? We asked funders to tell us how COVID-19 is impacting their grant-making decisions and thinking. And 101 funders responded to the survey, which is a great response, and the results were anonymous. One of the key questions is this one here. Have you changed or adapted your granting and operating approach? And the green bar says it all. Nearly 90% said yes. And of the 10% who haven't adapted their approach, we asked if they would in the future. 1/3 said they're planning to, and about 2/3 said not. Next one. So of the 77 who have changed their approach to funding, these are the details of how. The green, oops, let's go back one. Is that me doing this? Kerry, help me out here. Wow, how did it do that? The technology is, there's like a little wizard doing this without me knowing. Okay, we want to stay right there. Sorry, everyone. So the green bar, increased flexibility, 72%. So that's great news. The blue bar brought forward grant payments, 27% did that. And the yellow bar, shifting to unrestricted funding, nearly 50% have done that and are doing that. The aqua bar suspended their regular program for C19, about 36%. And the orange established a new C19 program, 32%. That's just amazing, this sort of work. And the purple bar increased grant funding by 42% of funders have increased their grant funding. And non-financial support, the pink bar, that's being offered by about 26% as of the last survey. And then the gold bar at the end, other, is explained on this slide. And it's interesting to see some of the other things that have been done to respond, and these are the responses. So many are paying for key staff and additional resources to build digital capability, which is incredibly important, supporting advocacy work for vulnerable groups, increasing public and government advocacy work, have no untied funding, but through discussion agreeing to reallocate it to areas of more pressing need, which is fabulous. Providing expertise and mentoring, capturing learnings, and the system is incredibly stressed, as you know. So on this next slide, about 60% said yes, that they're funding new grant partners around C19 and in these areas. So outside of their regular program, in new focus areas, some are just focusing specifically emergency funding around C19, outside of their regular timing, and local organizations that they're funding. Some are non-DGR or ACNC registered. And many are actively reaching out to NFPs, taking referrals, and some non-competitive grants where everyone gets something based on financial information. And for these areas of needs, which is interesting, so immediate relief, food security, bushfires, of course, and response and recovery, and then collective funding overall, which we've seen on the national funding platform. So this next question, what were you planning to do for your fiscal year 2021 distribution and grant amounts? And of the 15 who said they would increase their funding, the amount of increase was between 3 to 40%, with an average about 25%. And this included bushfire and C19 commitments. Most said at the time of this survey, which was in May, that it was too soon to tell. So it'll be interesting to see what their responses are in this current survey that we'll report on soon. Of the 10 who said they'd be decreasing, most were expecting lower investment returns and dividends, which is what was driving that. And one person in particular said they expected their corpus to decrease by 75%, which is completely awful. Luckily, only one indicated that. On this page, so the question, has the value of your corpus declined as a result of the economic instability? And again, most funders expect that their corpus will decline. But of that group, nearly 33% expect to reduce their granting levels as a result. But another, what was positive is that another 50% intend to maintain or increase their giving levels. Next slide. So is your foundation engaging in advocacy on behalf of a particular group or groups as part of C19? And of the 67 respondents for this question, about 40% are engaging in advocacy as part of C19. And if are you interested in pooling resources or combining processes with other funders and foundations in response to C19? And this is the last survey question that I'm sharing with you. And of the 68 who responded, the results are split pretty evenly. About half of the surveyed funders for this question are collaborating and discussing how they can work together. And we hope to see more of this in future, of course, and are seeing more of it. So in summary, most comments that we received noted that the importance of being part of Philanthropy Australia community, the community within PA, is enabling them to discuss and share ideas and share information and data like this. Many noted the difficulty of predicting what will happen, hence the need to hasten slowly. Many looked forward to exploring how philanthropy could support NFP sustainability down the track, and its role in this next phase in helping NFPs access stimulus funding. and particularly in areas like affordable housing, energy transition, and food security. So what we wanted to do at this stage is segue to the G21 regional context. And as we move to the panel discussion, the combined brains trust of Cynthia, Gail, Austin, Gill, and Kerry have provided a list of some of the key issues that they are seeing right now across the G21 region. So to get the discussion going, I'll go through 7 areas that they've put forward to stimulate the discussion. So first of all, on the next slide is this. I'm so good with technology, please forgive me. Getting better every day. Luckily, it's my last slide. So these are some of the things, the 7 points they mentioned. So increased demand across the food relief sector, lack of sufficient supports for key members of the community, and notably asylum seekers and international students, increased social isolation and concerns around the longer-term impact on mental health. We're hearing so much about that in the press as well. Long-term impact on financial vulnerability and stress with that. Ensuring that sufficient support is in place for the most vulnerable in our community to be able to access job opportunities, and uncertainty over how community services will be able to recover post-JobKeeper, as well as meeting increased demand. And then finally, supporting the well-being and mental health of volunteers and workers within community services. So then the last bullet was added to ensure increased access and availability to affordable and social housing. So there's just a little bit to discuss, and it's incredible to have the opportunity to go through this. So Kerry, I will, at this point, there you go, you took it away. That makes it so much easier. Thank you. And this is it's the stage where we're going to try to go through. We've got a series of questions I want to throw to the panel. And I'd like to start out with what you're seeing and hearing or thinking about during this crisis. And I'd like to throw to Austin of Percy Baxter Charitable Trust first to kick it off.
Thanks, Pat. And I think you'd have to start by saying having over 100 organisations and 150 people in the Zoom room does say something about the spread and depth of activities that are going on in the G21 region. So, I mean, while we're focusing on a few, there's an enormous amount of wonderful work going on across the whole region. But around Percy Baxter has been really pleased to become more actively involved in the whole area of social and affordable housing. And we've been able to make a grant along with, in collaboration with the Anthonyy Costa Foundation, to G21 and Scherer Villa. And that has provided a wonderful example of collaboration between the philanthropic trusts, but also collaboration between the 5 local government authorities that sit within G21 and many other stakeholders that have come together to try and work out how we can expand social and affordable housing in the region. That's one of a number of sort of focus that foci that we've been involved in, but certainly other trusts and foundations in the region.
That's brilliant. And the theme of collaboration is going to come out more and more, I think. And Gail, when we were talking about this the other day, if you could answer the same question, what are you seeing, hearing, or thinking about the Geelong community?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. And let me perhaps expand on Austin's point around collaboration and, you know, really how we got to today's event. We developed back in November 2018 a Trust and Foundations Network. And at our very first meeting, which was attended by the speakers here today, along with a representative from the Raymond Trust, the Bendigo Bank, the Jack Brockhoff Foundation, and I think Anita's in the room today, the Dawn Wade Foundation, I think Brian Edwards in the room today, community sector banking, I think Bruce Argyle might be in the room today. So we all got together as a group, really probably for the first time. And from the absolute outset, at that very first meeting, there was a really strong desire amongst the group to share, which was fantastic in terms of, you know, resources and ideas. There was a really strong focus on education, education around all of our different foundations. We're all different, but at the end of the day, we're quite similar. You know, we're all about supporting this fabulous community where we all love to live. Educating one another around programs and issues. Collaborative approach from the outset, and there's already been some great examples of joint funding of initiatives amongst the foundations, which has been fabulous. So it's been a really great initiative for us to get together, as we now do quarterly, to talk about what's happening in the region, and to share and hopefully in the future collaborate even further on what we might be able to do to strengthen this community. I just wanted to tell a little story about an experience I had last week, just in terms of what I'm hearing and seeing. I had a phone call from a community organisation that works in the arts space and very focused around issues related to mental health. And I think every one of us know and hear and read in the paper every day the struggles that we're having in our community right now. And she was wanting to pitch an idea to me around our current grant round that we have available, and was telling me about collaboration that she had with a mental health provider, and an idea that she had for a program of how to bring together their two organisations and support people with mental health with an arts focus. And I guess there were three things that I took away from that conversation that was just absolutely fantastic. And I guess the first was the fact that I had an opportunity to learn and understand what was going on in those two organisations. We were able to discuss and collaborate around the opportunity, but more importantly, that individual picked up the phone and had a chat and engaged. And I guess if there's any one message that I want to get across to organisations today, is that's what we all want as a collective, is to hear from you and to see how we can support you. Perhaps that's enough for me for now.
No, look, Gail, that's brilliant. And on the final point, when people have been asking me at Philanthropy Australia how it's different for us as a team, and I look back over these many months, and you know, sitting in our offices here at home, I have had deeper conversations with our members, really targeted, like what Gail describes. You know, we as an organization do a lot of this sort of thing, bringing people together, but the really specific conversations of trying to match funders with opportunities and ideas and innovation, and a lot of worrying. So it's just so good to hear examples like that. So and Kerry, I'm looking at you on the screen. We wanted you to go next on this question. What's happening at Give Where You Live?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think again, this is going to be a fairly common comment through today's session is, you know, for us, we're having so many conversations with our community partners to really understand what is going on and what they're seeing and hearing, and trying to understand some of the challenges. So that initial introductory sort of slide was really, I guess, kind of skimming the surface of some of the things that we are seeing and hearing. I'm going to talk probably at a slightly different perspective and actually look at some of the bigger sort of questions or opportunities that Give Where You Live also are seeing right now, and some of the thinking that we're doing around these different challenges. With regards to the food relief sector as an example, so quite early on when we went into lockdown, we started conversations with both state and federal government around how we might be able to support the increased demand into the food relief sector, and at the same time actually support our local hospitality sector as well, which we're going through some really extraordinary times and having to close doors and adapt what they do. So we are still working really hard on being able to develop this program, and hopeful that we will still be able to get some support to roll this out. And really what we're looking at trying to do is actually tapping into our broader community and leaning on our local hospitality industry and asking them to also support the provision of food relief to those who are experiencing challenges right now. You've got an added bonus of increasing the access to food relief, but also the ability to actually drive some funding into a much needed industry that is also going to need to recover over the coming months. In addition to that, and I think this is probably an even bigger question or that we're asking ourselves is, what does that economic recovery look like for our region? And the term around building back better is a term that I think many people use and is comes up in conversation quite regularly. And so at Give Where You Live, we are actually having some quite serious conversations and discussions across our networks and partners, both philanthropic, community organisations and businesses, around what a post-COVID recovery could look like for our region, and starting to have conversations around the development of more inclusive and democratic economic models in our region, and what does that look like so that we can actually ensure that any economic recovery is actually ensuring equitable opportunity across our region. So they're probably two of the kind of bigger things, and happy to have separate conversations around some of those because I know they're quite sort of meaty. But
that's brilliant, Kerry, and it's an awful lot that you're thinking of. There's quite a bit there. And Cynthia, for Anthony Costa Foundation, what are you seeing and thinking about?
Sure. Well, the first thing I want to talk about that I'm sort of seeing and hearing isn't necessarily about an issue, but it's about how people are responding. And so I think we're really seeing and hearing from organizations that are both already grantees, organizations that are seeking grants, that they really are being resilient in many ways. They're being really innovative, they're being nimble, they're being flexible, and they are not giving up. And I think it's really important to acknowledge, I think, despite, you know, a lot of what we seeing and hearing about are about challenges, that there really is an amazing, I think, in some respects, positivity in terms of how people are trying to approach what's going on. And I just want to acknowledge that and appreciate that. I think the other thing that we're seeing and hearing is really, again, sort of a combination of the issues, is that COVID-19 in many respects has laid bare many things that we've known for a long time, but I think has brought them up into a greater public awareness. So around the issue of, let's say, you know, the New Start rate, or around the gendered issues that affect things like employment and childcare, issues around education and the inequality and inequity that exists in education. So and part of, I think, what we've seen is because this has been, you know, while those issues have existed for a long time, because of the awareness and because there's been a whole new set of people who are dealing with the issues, the sort of who is vulnerable has changed, you know, in our community because of COVID-19. And I think that changes then sort of how we probably need to respond to what's going on. And that there's a willingness probably to respond differently to what's going on and to sort of grab that. And to me, that sort of circles back to the collaboration thing. I think we've seen probably, I want to say, more collaboration than maybe in a long time, both around specific issues. So I have to say the work that the food relief agencies did in the beginning of COVID-19 was absolutely amazing. And the work that GFAN did in terms of trying to support people, and just the people helping each other out to make sure that people got fed who needed to get fed in our community was amazing. And again, that sort of moves all the way up to, I think, to some of the work that the different funders are doing. We've probably seen more collaboration and co-funding locally than we have in a long time, because I think there's been this awareness and also a little bit of urgency, but I think that awareness has become more clear for everybody. So I think what we're really probably thinking about is how can we capitalize on both of those things, both sort of the nimbleness and the flexibility and the willing to innovate, and also that sort of willingness to collaborate in our community.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cynthia. Well, then that leads us into responding. So how are each of you responding in this current context? And Gail, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, so look, it certainly has been interesting. And look, I'll touch very quickly on what we've done, because I think more people are interested about what we're going to do. Yeah. But in terms of the grants that we made in 2019-20, the acquittals for those were due in July. So we reached out to all of our organisations, early in the piece and said, look, let us know where you're at. If you need an extension on your acquittal, that's absolutely no problem. It's interesting though, majority of the grants that we provided in 1920, I think there was about 51 of them. There's only 9 that still have outstanding acquittals. But, some of those acquittals won't be delivered until maybe even January next year. So I guess the point that, that we are completely flexible around that acquittal process, not just then, but also moving forward. It's just, again, about engagement and the conversation around what organisations need. The timing of our 2021 grant round probably couldn't have been worse. Applications closed on the 17th of February this year. And then, there's a little bit of a thing that happened. So we reached out to every organisation and said, do you want to resubmit? And, we had a number of organisations change their projects and grants and budgets, very quickly. So I think our grants committee probably doubled the number of meetings that we had to get to that point of identifying our 2021 grants. But we were very focused on some of the issues that we flagged earlier, mental health, food security, isolation, migrant and refugee communities. And we had some grants and some feedback from a number of organisations that allowed us to get some emergency funding out very quickly, that the board approved very quickly. But I guess in terms of moving forward, at our board meeting last week, the board agreed that we would continue to have an open grant round and an open emergency grant round. So we will shift slightly. So any organisation that feels that they are in emergency circumstances can engage us for funding. So the first thing that you need to do is just get on the phone and connect with us. So I'm just delighted that we're going to be able to offer that opportunity in an emergency context. And look, it is just a matter of the organisation identifying, that unprecedented demand that many of them will have, looking at the financial circumstances and sustainability issues. But so grants are available from the Community Foundation at any time. It's just a matter of an organisation getting on the phone. I guess that's in terms of how we're responding now. That's probably the main piece of information that I can share.
That constant theme of connecting and talking to each other often is coming through, and we're seeing that across the sector as well. Austin, what are your plans? How have you responded?
Well, I think in your survey, Pat, you mentioned flexibility and nimbleness, and Gail's touched on that too. Certainly, Percy Baxter Trust, in consultation, obviously, with Perpetual and grantees, has been able to be quite flexible. So a number of organisations asked if they could come back to us and redesign to some extent what they had applied for initially, and we, along with Perpetual, were quite open to that. And I think, just to reiterate what Gail said, we're only all a phone call away. So, and we're all in Geelong, we're all in it together. We are Geelong. So we really do need to show that support to each other, and don't feel you know, backwards in coming forwards about giving us a ring and talking about you know, the need to change the way you're doing business. The landscape's completely changed for a lot of people, and we're all willing to look at how we're transacting. So thanks, Pat.
Oh, thank you. And Cynthia.
Sure. So I think I would talk about the sort of how we have responded to the current situation in two ways. I think one, we actually took a proactive response to the sort of health emergency that existed. So we provided some emergency funding and grants to both Barwon Health and to Epworth, Geelong, to support building our community's capacity to actually be COVID ready and be able to respond. So I think that was really important, and that absolutely happened outside of a grant round in terms of making that response. And then I think we also looked at the response to the community service sector and the challenges that they were experiencing at the time. And we, you know, actually ended up matching a series of grants that the Give Where You Live Foundation did to 8 organizations. So we didn't, you know, ask for applications. We didn't, I mean, I think we got the money out the door like in 24 hours, as long as people, you know, sent us the invoice. You know, so trying to be, you know, responsive and in both of those ways. I think we're continuing to look at how we can be responsive, particularly around the issues of cash flow. So we've certainly had conversations with a number of current grantees who, you know, were on a particular schedule in terms of how they were supposed to receive their grants, and have looked at modifying that to assist with cash flow, because we know that can be a really important part to how people are able to continue to do their work. And I think, like Austin and Gail have both talked about, just being willing to have those conversations and be open to, you know, what people have to say at this point. We absolutely, while we see and hear things, we're not in the expert, you know, we're not the expert. I just had this conversation recently with some of my, a couple of the board members. You know, if somebody comes to us and says, we need to do this differently, who are we to say no? Like, we are not the expert on how to deliver that service. You know, they are. And if they say we need to change how we do it, then we need to trust them. And so there's also, I think, that element of trust that's really important right now, because the people who are, you know, providing the services and doing the work, they're the ones who know how to do it. And we need to trust them in terms of them saying to us, here's what we need to get that done.
Thank you, Cynthia. Rapid response, you know, flexibility and trust. I mean, one of the speakers we bring out from the U.S. has coined the phrase, which you probably would remember, some of you, philanthropy at the speed of trust. And we are nowhere without trust, and that thread comes through on probably every session we're in. Kerry, you haven't had a chance to answer this yet, so how's Give Where You Live responding in this context?
Look, Give Where You Live, I think, has responded in a very similar way to all the other panel members. So as Cynthia mentioned, Give Where You Live and the Anthonyy Costa Foundation actually matched grants to 8 organisations early on in the COVID crisis. And they were outside of our existing grant rounds and were seen as emergency grants to actually support some really critical services at that point in time. We have shortened our community grant round, which was in April, May, and we shortened the timeline around that. Maybe created a little bit of internal stress and pressure around that, but we really wanted to make sure that we were getting the funds out as quickly as possible to where it was needed. It's similar to what everyone else has said. We're having regular conversations with our community partners to ensure flexibility and support around what they're funded to do. So even applications that we received back in April, May, a lot of them are having to be adapted and changed just because the context keeps changing on such a regular basis. And again, reiterating what Cynthia was saying is that we're not the experts in this, and so the conversations we're having with our community partners is really about trying to understand what is it that you need and how do we help you to do that, because these are really extraordinary circumstances and it does change on a regular basis. In addition to that, we've been fortunate to leverage additional funding into some of our grant rounds. So the Anthonyy Costa Foundation funds for those emergency grants was fantastic. We also managed to get some additional funding from the Foundation, and more recently, the Percy Baxter Foundation have provided some flexibility to us around how we distribute some of the funds that come through so that we can actually increase funding into our current Feed Geelong grant round as well. So I'm really trying to, I guess, use all our resources and contacts and relationships to try and actually get as much funding and resources out to the community. I guess beyond the funding, there's a lot of other kind of things that Give Where You Live have also been doing. I'm not going to go into a long list of them because the list is actually really long, but I might just touch on a couple of them. So most of the people in the room would be aware of the GROW initiative, and we're continuing to advocate inclusion of GROW social procurement clauses and targeted employment outcomes with any key investment or stimulus funding that is coming into the region. So really going back to that point I made earlier around making sure that any economic recovery is recovery and support for all of our community. In addition to that, as Cynthia touched on, right in the early days, the Geelong Food Assistance Network, we were regularly updating the Where You Can Eat publication because, again, information about where you could access food relief and the availability of it was changing on a really regular basis. So maintaining that information and making sure that people had up-to-date, accurate information around that was really critical and continues to be something that we focus a lot of effort on. In addition, we have been pulling together and working with a number of community organisations in pulling together banks of resources and tools and references for community organisations, local businesses and also individuals. So helping them navigate, I guess, a really complex space of where they can go for assistance, where they can go for funding, where they can go for policies or COVID safe practice information, all that kind of stuff. So it started quite early on and then has actually morphed into something quite significant. So we do have a number of resources available on the Give Where You Live website, which we do update quite regularly. And we're now in the process of actually working with Geelong Council around developing a similar pool of resources that can support volunteers and COVID safe practices within the food relief sector too. So I guess just sort of summarising, I guess, and wrapping up from all the comments that the panellists have made around this question is, I think we're seeing right now that even foundations and philanthropic organisations are being really challenged by the current context, and really sort of forcing us to rethink and sort of question maybe some of our processes or timelines that we have had in place. And I think, you know, all the panelists here today have spoken about how they're changing how they do things, and changing what they're looking at, and changing who they're talking to, and also bringing in other organisations and other funders, and using all our resources that we have available to us to actually support the community.
Thank you, Kerry. There's a lot in that, and yes, the whole theme of change, and I like the discussion around doing things, well, shortening your granting process, you know, all those things that we do that are so important internally, and yet more than ever we've had to respond as quickly as possible. So I'm mindful that we've got 10 to 12 minutes, if my watch is sort of correct, and we've got one more question to throw and then a wrap up. And at the end, I believe we're going to have a slide at the end that has contact details and grant rounds and that sort of thing. So you need to make sure and stay to the end, but we'll get you there as quickly as we can. So with all of that, it's now important to ask what you're funding and looking at right now, and what you're considering in the future. And Gill, you haven't had a chance to talk yet. I'd love to ask you to comment on what Percy Baxter's doing and going to do.
Thanks, Pat. Well, I'll just tell you a bit better how to go about the funding from Percy Baxter. So the trust is managed by Perpetual, and together with 2 members of the Baxter family, they make up the 3 trustees. We only have one funding round a year, and that's coming up to opening. The Perpetual score the applications, and they're looking for organisations that have good governance, solid leadership, strong strategy, and an outcome focus on impact. For Geelong, the trustees take their advice from an advisory committee, and that's comprised of myself, my father, Cameron McNaughton, and Austin Paterson. All the applications that are relevant to Geelong come to us from Perpetual, and we go through them all, and we consider all applications for potential funding. And during the process, we generally contact organisations to get some perhaps more clarification or any updates on things since the application went in. The Trust supports a broad range of activities, including capital, but the main areas broadly include education, health, and social and community welfare. We do make some multi-year grants, but these are by invitation only. So to apply, you need to go to the Perpetual website and to the 2021 Impact Philanthropy Application Program, and the key dates, and these will all be put up on a slide for you to see. The applications open on Monday the 26th of October. They close on Friday the 4th of December, and applicants will be informed of the outcomes by Friday the 25th of June 2021. So that's how to get the funding from the Percy Baxter Charitable Trust. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Gill. That's great. Oh, and I think we're going to go to Cynthia next.
I have to unmute myself. So the Anthony Costa Foundation effectively takes grants all year round. We have 3 grant rounds. We've just completed the first intake of applications for the year. And so we're just doing follow-up right now with all the people who applied in that round. But we've already opened the next round. So we're already taking applications right now through the middle of November. I think the 11th of November is the deadline date. And those applications will be considered at our December board meeting. And so people would hear in December if they submit an application between now and the middle of November. We also have one final round in this year, which opens the 1st of January and goes until about the middle of March. And those applications then are considered at our April board meeting. And so people would hear by the end of April about that process. And then the process starts all over again for us. So we do effectively take applications all year round and you know, have the ability to consider grants throughout the year. We also have on occasion considered grants in our off board meetings. So not just August, December, and April, but also in board meetings in between. So we do have flexibility absolutely around that. You know, like everybody here, I think what we encourage the most, and I think this is actually really, really important, you know, it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort to actually apply for funding. And so I think it's really important that people actually have a conversation first and be willing to get honest and open feedback about whether you're a good fit for our organization. We have 5 focus areas, so we are quite broad. We do have a focus towards young people in terms of what we like to support, but we do fund across arts and culture, social welfare, education, community and housing development, and I know I'm missing one, which is health. So really, really broad. And so that's again why I encourage people to have a conversation first and to make that call. I will say for those of you who have worked with Anthonyy and Costa Foundation in the past, the reality was there wasn't really a lot of people you could have a conversation with in the past. I've only been with the foundation since the beginning of June. So I know that you know, presents a new opportunity for people to make that connection. So I really encourage you to do that because I think it will make your time better utilized and potentially more, you know, effective. And happy also to then also tell you if I actually think you might be a better fit for Gail or for Kerry or for Gill and Austin or any other funders locally, because you know, I do think it's also important to try and also just build capacity generally. And so having those conversations with a funder doesn't just sometimes give you information that helps you with that funder, but can build your capacity generally around fundraising. And you know, whether that's about me sharing information about somebody else or just the questions I'm going to ask, maybe the questions that other funders are going to ask. And so that can help you sort of refine your pitch and how you might need to communicate what it is that you're trying to do.
Can I just say, this is just the best example of collaboration with funders in a geographic area. We're at Philanthropy Australia, we're always looking for, you know, best practice examples of good philanthropy, and this, you're really doing well. It's exciting to watch. It really is very encouraging. And now, Kerry, we're going to ask you this question: what are you funding and looking at funding now? And then we'll throw to Gail to summarize and wrap up.
Thank you. So a couple of things to kind of note. Our sort of key focus areas for our grants are around education, employment and life crisis. They seem to be still relevant today as they were when we developed our theory of change a few years ago. I think a consideration that we're kind of looking at right now is how do we balance the more immediate needs around life crisis and adapting existing programs but also making sure that we're continuing to fund and support programs that we know are going to be really critical in the next sort of 6 to 12 months. So funding into the education space is probably a good example there, that we are still continuing to fund and support projects, even though they are severely restricted and limited around some of the access that they have to students and to schools right now. So similar to what we've been saying throughout this, is that we are having regular conversations with our community partners and being as flexible as we can around how and when they're able to deliver their projects, and also supporting them to actually adapt and adjust what they intended on delivering in the current context. We currently have 2 grant rounds that are open as well, that are worth acknowledging. So our Feed Geelong grant round is currently open, as the name suggests, is focused around funding to support the food relief sector. That grant round closes on the 24th of September, and announcements and confirmations of who's successful, and that will be in early November. We also have our Community Connection grant round, which is focused on social isolation and community connection, and that closes on the 10th of September. And similar, we will be announcing successful grantees in early November for that one. So both of those grant rounds are incredibly relevant in the current environment and context. We have also been fortunate again to work with the Percy Baxter Foundation, and are looking at increasing funding into our existing emergency relief voucher program, and we're just having some further conversations and thinking around what that looks like, and whether we may want to target some particular cohorts who are particularly at risk at this time, and increasing demand into the food relief space at the moment. The other comment I'll make with regards to the Community Connection grant round, we made an additional opportunity for funding within that to focus very specifically around community engagement. One of the conversations, some of the conversations I've been having with community partners is the need to support some of the really core community development, community engagement activities, so that our community partners and ourselves have a better sense of actually really what is needed in community, and to ensure that the community voice can inform both how a community service delivers what their service, but also potentially inform what we think about going forward as well. So a little bit of a broader opportunity within that particular grant round. Also, just to note, many of you would be aware that Give Where You Live normally has innovation grant round, which has historically opened sort of October, November each year. That grant round has been under review for the last year, and we are still having discussions and thinking around what that looks like. I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to get that grant round up sooner rather than later, and it will be aligning in a little bit more closely with our new strategic plan, which is currently in development. And so we're looking at adjusting that grant round to actually take a much more collaborative co-design process, where we sit with our partners and support our partners, and again bring in whatever expertise or resources that we can beyond just the funding to support a key project. So worth keeping an eye open for that one. And I guess just reiterating what everyone else has said again today is just reach out and talk to us and let us know what's happening in your space, what's happening with your organisation and in your community. Really keen to understand really what those big challenges and blockages are. We are absolutely open to considering additional emergency grants as well. So we're not considering that as necessarily being a one-off. However, we obviously need to assess that along with other grant applications that are coming through for some of the other key areas. I might just also note, which I was remiss in noting before, that with our emergency grants, we Give Where You Live did actually access some of our corpus funding to support that. So it did mean that last financial year we were moving drawing funds from our investment so that we could actually ensure that increased funds were going into the community at this critical time.
Thanks, Kerry. And Gail, you want to take it away and finish up? We're running a little bit over. So.
I'm very conscious of time, so I'll be very brief. Just in terms of the Geelong Community Foundation funding opportunities at the moment, our Philanthropy 500 grant round is currently open. And there's actually some donors in the room for that program, so thanks to the donors that are in the room. That $45,000 grant is available for a community wellbeing project, and that grant round closes on the 14th of September. The grant review panel will shortlist that round to 3, and then those 3 organisations will pitch to the donors in our Philanthropy 500 program, which is a really exciting opportunity to educate donors around community issues, which is one of the great things that I love about our collective giving program. So that vote night, and unfortunately it's going to be virtual this year, will be held on the 12th of November, when we will announce who will receive that $45,000 grant. So very happy to talk to people about community wellbeing projects for that round. The Droid Golf Day Capital Grant, as many of you would know, Droid Insurance and Risk are fabulous supporters of the Geelong Community Foundation, and unfortunately golf days just aren't possible to run at the moment. So that capital grant round is certainly on the agenda for 2021. Our major grant round will open week commencing 7 December, close around 15 February. So that is our standard grant round. So look forward to providing opportunities for community organisations there. As I said before, our emergency grant round or grant opportunity is now available, but that's in terms of how you go about that, it's contact with me to discuss that opportunity at any time. 2019-20 was a really good year actually for the foundation. We ended up in front of where we were in the previous year in terms of our corpus, and our corpus continues to grow. Our fundraising was great during 19-20, and we are very focused on continuing that trend. So we're here for the future, forever, for community organisations. You know, we raise funds, we invest those funds, and we make grants. We keep it pretty simple. But we're here for the long haul to assist you. Very quickly, Give Where You Live and ourselves are working together on a financial capability project at the moment. We got some funding from the Extra Foundation. The Extra Foundation very much committed to building financial wellbeing in a community. We've got a consultant working on that project and a project reference group. So if anybody wants to contribute information around financial capability issues and in this community, we'd be delighted to connect you up with our consultant for a one-on-one discussion, looking at understanding what the resources are that already exist, but specifically what the gaps are in that space. So if anybody wants to, that hasn't already had the opportunity to feed into that project, get in touch with us. So in wrapping up, thanks so much to the audience for the participants. It is just so great to be able to easily tap into webinars at the moment, and I think we're all enjoying being able to connect in this way to receive information. So thanks everybody for coming along. Pat, if we were together, I would have this big bottle of Veuve Clicquot to give you. Luckily we're not, so I haven't. Many of you would know that, or you may not know, that Pat actually was a recipient of the Medal of the Order of Australia this year for her service to community she's an incredible woman, and we're really grateful to have her in our space, and also has done some fabulous work around collective giving with the women's the Women's Fund in Melbourne. So well done, Pat, and thank you so much for being a part of the session today. We really appreciate your input and your knowledge and your advice. So thank you.
Thank you all. I'm tempted to move to Geelong now.
It's a great community, absolutely fantastic community. And Kerry, I want to thank you very much and the team at Give Where You Live for the great support that you've provided to organise this event. So I know it takes a lot of time and effort, but at least we didn't have to do name tags. So thanks so much for your help and your team's help to organise today. Cynthia, Austin and Gill, it's just an absolute pleasure to work with you guys all the time, and I learn from you. We share, we engage, and I absolutely love it. So thanks for being who you are and your willingness to engage. There were the opportunities for questions on the chat. If we didn't get to everything today, we will respond to any questions that are there that we haven't picked up. I think Kerry mentioned earlier the slides will be emailed, and we will also in a few days provide a link to the recording of this session. So if you wanted to share it with any of your colleagues, you'll be able to do that. There will be a survey that we will send out to you shortly. And look, I really would appreciate it, and I know we would all appreciate it, if you could just take a few minutes to complete that survey. We're really keen to extend this engagement, and I know we'd love to bring some other funders to present to you, some other funders that are linked in with our Trusts and Foundations network. We'd love to be able to bring those people into the Zoom room and get them to share with you the funding that they're interested in providing into this region as well. So please respond to that survey so that we can get some sense of what your interests are. That would be fantastic. So I think the theme is pretty clear in our presentation today. Reach out to us, engage with us, talk to us. That's certainly been a common thread today, so we can't stress it enough. But perhaps just let me finish with a little quote from one of my favourite people in the world, in Henry Ford. Coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success. And I think we've demonstrated today that what we can achieve as a group. So thanks to everyone for coming. Thanks for your participation. And look forward to seeing you all and being with you and having coffee with you and doing all of those things soon. Thank you.